usually, when you picture the American Revolutionary War, a very specific set of images comes to mind.
Right. You think of the 13 colony.
Exactly. You picture Boston Harbor or like the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia.
Or Washington crossing the
Yeah,
Delaware.
it is a story intrinsically tied to that eastern seaboard. But today, we are flipping the map for you. We're looking north, and we are looking at French Canadians who actually fought for the American Continental Army.
It completely challenges that neat, tidy narrative of the Revolution. I mean, we are so used to the story being about the colonies throwing off the British yoke.
Right.
But the northern theater of that war involves a completely different demographic, dealing with a very different set of geopolitical realities.
And to figure out how this happened, we have a really fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive.
We really do.
We are looking at actual 18th century land deeds, military pay ledgers dating all the way back to 1783, and then pulling us into the present, we have these incredibly detailed modern genealogical research notes.
Yeah, those family group sheets compiled by a retiree. It is a remarkable mix of sources.
It really is.
You have the macro-historical documents like armies, regiments, land grants, just sitting right next to the deeply personal micro-history of one specific family line.
And that is our mission today. We are going to extract the hidden story of the Chartier family. We're going to trace their highly unusual contributions to the American Revolution.
Follow their forced movement across borders.
Exactly, and figure out how to connect these dry, centuries-old military records to a living, breathing, modern family line, specifically the Perrier family.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at the timeline in these notes, the origins of this French-Canadian military service don't actually start with the Revolution at all. They start decades earlier.
They do, yeah. To understand the Chartier family's military service, we have to go back to the historical setup of the family patriarch, a man named John Carter.
Okay.
He was born in Massachusetts, a Puritan colonial boy. But in 1704, his entire world was upended during the Deerfield Raid.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was a brutal frontier conflict, right?
Incredibly brutal. French and Native American forces attacked a Massachusetts settlement in the dead of winter. John was taken captive, and he was forced to march hundreds of miles north through the snow to Quebec.
That's wild.
And over time, he was entirely integrated into French-Canadian society. He converted to Catholicism, he assimilated culturally, and his name was literally changed to Jean-Baptiste Chartier.
Wait, I'm stuck on something here. If John Carter becomes Jean-Baptiste Chartier in the early 1700s, by the time the American Revolution rolls around in 1776, his descendants have been culturally French for generations.
Yes, deeply rooted.
Right. They are thoroughly established in Quebec, so why on earth would they risk their lives joining an American rebellion?
Well,
I mean, they're living under British rule in Quebec, sure, but they have no real connection to the colonies anymore. Why get involved in a war down south?
this raises an important question, and you have to consider the complex loyalties of that specific era. The British had only recently taken control of Quebec from the French after the 7 Years' War.
Oh, okay.
So there was a massive amount of anti-British sentiment just simmering among the French Canadians. They felt occupied.
Makes sense.
When the American Revolution broke out, the Continental Army saw an opportunity to capitalize on that resentment, so they authorized the creation of the 2nd Canadian Regiment.
This is the unit the sources refer to as Colonel Moses Hazen's regiment, right? Or Congress's own.
Exactly. Colonel Hazen actively recruited sympathizers from Quebec and Nova Scotia, and he wasn't just looking for bodies to hold muskets.
What was he looking for?
He was looking for men who intimately knew the terrain of the northern frontier, who had legitimate grievances against the British Crown, and who were willing to fight. And the Chartier family answered that call in a massive way.
Yeah, the records highlight Theodore Chartier specifically. This is John Carter's son, so he is a first-generation French-Canadian, but with this captive American father.
Right.
And Theodore didn't just stand in a line formation. The sources show he utilized his unique cross-cultural background to serve as a scout and an interpreter.
Which was an incredibly vital role. People forget how treacherous the northern theater of the war was.
Oh, totally.
You have an American army trying to operate in dense frozen territories, trying to navigate impassable waterways, and they needed to communicate with local populations, native tribes, and French settlers.
So having someone like Theodore was huge.
A massive strategic asset. Having a lieutenant who understood the cultural and linguistic nuances, who could negotiate for supplies or intercept intelligence. A scout in that environment wasn't just walking in the woods. They were the eyes, ears, and voice of the regiment.
And we actually have the 18th century receipts for his service.
Right, yeah.
There is a document in our stack, an August 1783 pay ledger from the pay office in Philadelphia. Entry number 180 clearly lists, quote, Lieutenant Theodore Chartier. And it notes he's receiving $1,339 for the depreciation on his pay.
That term, depreciation, is essential to understanding the mechanics of how these soldiers were compensated, or, well, rather how they weren't.
Right.
During the war, the Continental Congress printed paper money to fund the army, but it wasn't backed by anything. The currency plummeted in value so severely that we still have the phrase, not worth a continental.
So they were essentially getting paid in worthless paper.
Exactly. Soldiers were starving. So by 1783, the government was essentially issuing back pay to make up for that massive financial loss.
And the ledger also gives us an exact service timeline, which is amazing. It notes his pays for the period from May 1st, 1777 to January 1st, 1782.
Wow.
That is almost 5 years of active service. 5 years of navigating that brutal, freezing, highly dangerous theater of war we were just talking about.
It is a remarkable commitment. And the military records show this wasn't just an isolated decision by one guy. It was a multi-generational family effort.
Right, because Theodore's nephews and grandsons also joined.
Yes. Pierre-Marie, Jean-Marie, Antoine-Marie, who also goes by Anthony, and Antoine Joseph, who is listed as Joseph Jr. They all took up arms and served in Hazen's regiment.
But fighting for the Americans came with a massive, life-altering consequence. The Chartiers were now officially traitors to the British crown.
Very true.
And the British still very much controlled Canada at the end of the war. They couldn't just pack up their bags and go back to their farms in Quebec. It was way too dangerous.
They were essentially refugees.
Yeah.
This geopolitical reality forces a massive geographic shift for the family. The new American government recognized that these Canadian soldiers had sacrificed everything, their homes, their livelihoods, their safety in Quebec.
All to fight for the revolution.
Exactly. They couldn't go back north, so the government had to figure out what to do with them.
How did the government compensate them? Because the early American government didn't have a ton of cash lying around, despite that pay ledger trying to make up for the depreciation.
No, they didn't have cash, but they did have land. The New York State Legislature stepped in and set aside vast tracts of territory known as the Canadian and Nova Scotia Refugee Tract.
Okay, so a specific zone just for them.
Right. This was designed as a gratuity, a reward for their service, and a place for them to settle. Geographically, this was primarily located in Clinton County, New York, focusing on the towns of Chazy and Altona.
And the official lists in our sources outline the sheer scale of these grants. The document titled A List of the Canadian and Nova Scotia Refugees Entitled to Lands in the State of New York shows a solid block of Chartiers in the C section.
That's a long list.
It really is. Joseph, Peter, John, Joseph, June, Anthony, and Theodore. They are entitled to both 80-acre lots and 420-acre lots. That is 500 acres of land per soldier.
It sounds like a tremendous amount of property, right? But we have to look at the physical reality of what that property actually was at the time.
Which is basically nothing but trees, right?
Sure. Pretty much. We have a fascinating piece of documentary evidence here, a land sale deed from 1788. In this legal document, Antoine Chartier, who is listed as a refugee from Canada and late a soldier in the Hazen Regiment, he sells his 250-acre bounty land to a gentleman named Benjamin Moores.
For how much?
For the sum of £6 current money of New York.
£6. If you are a refugee and you just got 250 acres of land for free, why sell it for £6 to some guy named Benjamin?
Well, think about their situation.
It feels like winning the lottery, but the ticket is tied to a geography you've never been to, and the prize isn't cash, it's a massive uncultivated forest. It's like being handed the keys to a vast estate, but there's no house, no running water, and you have to build it all yourself with a hatchet.
Taking that lottery analogy a step further, the winner in this scenario is a war-weary veteran. He might have sustained injuries, and he has been away from a normal agricultural life for 5 years.
Right.
They handed a piece of paper saying they own a chunk of Clinton County, New York. But Clinton County in the 1780s is unbroken Adirondack wilderness.
Just dense forest.
There are no roads. There is no infrastructure. The sheer physical labor required to turn 250 acres of virgin forest into a working, profitable farm might have been impossible for many of these men.
So they just took the cash.
Exactly. Selling it to a land speculator like Benjamin Moores for immediate, tangible cash makes complete logical sense. They needed money to survive right then, not a generational logging project.
Okay, so if they are selling off some of these grants for quick cash, where do these soldiers actually end up?
The sources track a bit of a scattering effect, but generally the movement pushes southward. Pierre-Marie is recorded as settling in Vergennes-Dormont.
Okay.
Jean-Marie moved to Messina, New York. But a core group of them did manage to hold on to their lands and established a permanent foothold right there in Clinton County.
So this military land grant, even if some sold it, served as a geographical magnet. It pulled this family and future generations of this family southward out of Quebec and back onto American soil.
It did.
It is wild to think about. They're settling on the very soil their ancestor John Carter was kidnapped from a century prior.
It is a stunning reversal of migration, and it's driven entirely by the mechanism of war and government compensation. The border was incredibly porous back then, but the ownership of this land created a permanent anchor for the family in the United States.
So we have the 18th century deeds, the military ledgers, the sweeping historical movements. But how do we actually know that these specific soldiers connect to the modern people alive today?
Right.
Because, I mean, land changes hands all the time. People share last names. How do we bridge the gap between 1783 and today?
This is where we look at the methodology of modern genealogy. The researcher provided in our sources is investigating the Peria, Giles, Carberry, and Miles family lines.
Got it.
They aren't just looking at names. They are cross-referencing multiple independent sources, like documentary records, parish registries, and even genetic genealogy, or DNA, to validate the lineage and identify inconsistencies.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's walk through that detective work for a second. In the researcher's profile, they mention focusing on validating findings. So we can compare the war records to the detailed family group sheets they've compiled.
The central document in this part of the stack is the family group sheet for Marie Chartier and Pierre Poirier. According to the baptismal records, Marie was born in 1786 in Chambly, Quebec. She is the daughter of François Chartier.
Okay.
And Pierre Poirier was born in 1783 in Lacadie, Quebec.
So we have two French Canadians born in Quebec right after the American Revolution ended.
Yes. And if we trace their timeline, using the parish records provided, they live a very traditional, rooted life in Canada.
Yep.
They are married in October 1807 in Lacadie.
And they had a pretty large family, right?
Very large. Over the next 2 decades, they have Pierre, Joseph, Marie, Romaine, Narcisse, Louise, Henri, Isabelle, Louis, Olivier, Jean-Baptiste.
Wow.
And consistently, from 1809 all the way up through 1827, every single one of these children is baptized in Quebec towns. Lacadie, Saint-Luc, Saint-Athanase-de-Boulet.
So the paper trail places them firmly in Quebec for their entire prime adult lives.
Exactly.
They are thoroughly entrenched there. But when you look closely at this family group sheet, there is a massive spatial anomaly.
Yeah, the locations suddenly shift.
Right. After raising their entire family in Quebec for decades, you check the death records at the top of the page. Marie Chartier dies in 1850, but she dies in Altona, New York. And her husband Pierre dies in 1860 in Chazy, New York.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is how genealogy pieces the broader history together. Those death records perfectly validate the migration data we were just discussing regarding the Revolutionary War bounty lands.
Oh, because Altona and Chazy are the exact towns in Clinton County that were granted to the Chartier refugees decades earlier.
Exactly. It wasn't a random move.
Right. They didn't just throw a dart at a map in their old age and decide to move to upstate New York.
Structurally, what this tells us is that the Chartier family's initial foothold in Clinton County, which was established by those soldiers in Hazen's regiment, created a lasting migration corridor.
Even though Marie and Pierre spent their prime years raising their kids in Quebec.
Yes, that ancestral connection to the land in New York remained. When they eventually migrated south in their later years, they were following a well-worn family path. They were settling in the very towns granted to their refugee ancestors. The land grants acted as a homing beacon.
It's like an anchor was thrown across the border in the 1780s, and it just took 50 years for the rest of the family to pull themselves along the rope.
That's a great way to put it.
And we can trace that rope all the way to today. The sources connect this 19th century migration directly to Nelson Aaron Peria, and through modern DNA testing, this retiree's research shows how genetic genealogy corroborates the paper trail.
It's incredibly thorough work.
Over 135 living descendants spread across 5 different family branches can trace their genetic and geographical origins back to those original refugee soldiers.
It is a phenomenal demonstration of how macro historical events dictate micro realities. A colonial war over taxation and governance hundreds of years ago ultimately dictates where a couple in the 1850s decides to move.
Which in turn dictates where their descendants are born, who they marry, and where they eventually die.
Exactly.
To summarize this incredible journey for you listening, we started with a Puritan boy, John Carter, violently taken captive in a 1704 raid. He is completely assimilated into a Quebecois citizen.
And then his sons and grandsons grow up French-Canadian.
Right, but then they turn around and utilize their unique cultural skills to serve as Continental Army scouts and interpreters against the British. For their treason against the crown, they become refugees.
Earning massive but entirely wild bounty lands in New York.
And that land becomes the beacon that pulls the family back across the border, establishing a migration corridor that leads directly to a heavily researched, living modern family line today.
I think that is the profound value of this kind of in-depth research. It's so easy to look at a genealogical chart or an 18th century land deed and just see dry dates, strange names, and lists of acreage.
Yeah, just numbers on a page.
But this process proves that behind every single one of those data points is a life-altering human choice. It's a reminder that our own existences, who you are and where you are right now, are the direct result of our ancestors' boldest risks, their survival in impossible terrains, and their most desperate migrations.
Think about the absolute butterfly effect here. If John Carter hadn't been kidnapped in the dead of night in the Deerfield raid of 1704, his descendants never would have been in Quebec to join Hazen's regiment.
They never would have been in a position to act as French-speaking scouts for the Americans.
Exactly. They never would have earned that refugee land in New York. And those 135 modern descendants alive today wouldn't exist as they are. It makes you wonder what chaotic, seemingly tragic, historical event in your family's deep past is the exact reason you are sitting here today.